preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Ladies and gentlemen, I call this lecture Old Truths and New Clichés. What it is about, you will soon hear. There are times when I wonder what purpose fiction serves today. Why fabricate plots when life unfolds an inexhaustible wealth of events, more strange than anything literature might offer? Fantasy will never be able to match all the surprising twists that fact is made of. No pen has been able to produce a work so true and free of imperfection as a case history or the proceedings in a courtroom. Just as there is no perfect crime, so there is no perfect novel. Even Anna Karenina and Madame Bovary reveal flaws and inconsistencies that are part of all fiction. I am sometimes afraid that sooner or later men will arrive at the conclusion that reading fiction is a waste of time. But why should this thought frighten me? Is it just because I would be one of the victims? It's not just this. Fiction represents a highly intellectual challenge. Even if a machine could be invented that would be capable of relating to us the experiences of a new Raskolnikov, a modern Madame Bovary, or an American Anna Karenina, it would still be interesting to find out what happened to our imagination and its age-old instrument, the pen. It would be a lot more difficult for us to make peace with a literary machine than with a computer dealing with numbers. If a machine could tell stories, write plays, the creative men would have nothing to live for, nothing to expect. Just the same, there are already in existence a number of forces that might gradually lead up to this situation. As the modern reader's knowledge of psychology and human behavior grows, the commentaries of literary men on the subject will seem to him more and more superfluous, erroneous, or obsolete. Even now, there is little in a novel that can surprise him. He can get it all from case histories, newspapers and magazines, from the radio, from television, and from the screen. A man who walks from New York to California in our time may evoke admiration. Still, walking is not taken seriously as a means of long-distance transportation. Fiction may become a toy and a sport for amateurs. We see it happen in poetry right now. It is often so oblique and obscure, so ornamental and non-essential, that it has become a jargon for the few who imagine that they possess the key to solve its riddles. Thus far, the drama has not reached this stage, but it is getting there fast. The novel, we are told, is doing well. However, many of the works that are sold as novels turn out to be more journalism than literature. Never before has the dividing line between journalism and literature been as tenuous as it is now. In Helm, they called water sour cream. But this did not make their blintzes more tasty. To designate journalistic writing as novels represents neither a revolution nor an artistic gain. It is no more than a mask used to conceal the fact that prose literature now is going through the same crisis as poetry, although often in a different direction. Modern fiction seems to have forgotten its essence and purpose. Every type of amnesia has its causes, and the literary amnesia of our time is no exception. The small number of true talents that arise in any one generation is no longer enough to feed the many publishing houses, the huge printing presses, and the masses of readers that have developed with the decline of illiteracy. Moreover, true talents no longer have either the force or the means to make the same impression on their readers as they once did. But instead of admitting that literature is losing ground, some critics, publishers, and often the authors themselves simply set about to alter the concept of literature, to broaden it, as it were. What actually happens is that they confuse the true meaning of the term literature. This is comparable to a situation in which a group of athletes decides that the runners in a foot race should be allowed to use bicycles. This is a type of revolution which does not serve to enrich the field in which it takes place, but actually to impoverish and destroy it. It is strange that in our age of specialization, when every science is carefully defined, because every subdivision requires the full attention of a specialist, they should have involved in fiction a conglomeration, an eclectic hodgepodge of means and methods. Many a work of modern fiction includes amateurish essays on psychology and sociology, a lot of journalistic material which could be found in newspapers, magazines, and encyclopedias, a plethora of pseudo-scientific theories, and even the stuff gleaned from political brochures. In some instances, neither the writer nor his critic have the conception of what is original and what is borrowed. Where the writer had moved under his own power and where he has copied others. How did poetry come to this pass? What has happened to the drama? Why did prose literature transgress its natural boundaries? The real cause for this situation is the fact that the essence of fiction, the study of character and individuality, was never really in great demand. Even when fiction was at its best, there were many readers who would search in it for elements which are only of secondary importance. In the days when there were few mass circulation newspapers and no national magazines, and history books were badly written, the reader would seek and find in literature a lot more than what is essential. Literature would be read as a source of information on many subjects. War and Peace, for example, would be read as an account of the Napoleonic Wars. The novel could serve as a travelogue or a text on etiquette. At one time, literature provided the average reader with his sole contact with psychology and psychiatry. Modern times have brought about a radical change in this respect. Now the reader has unlimited access to information. He can easily attend lectures on these subjects. He can watch travelogues, or he can do the traveling in person. If the novel and the drama are to continue, they must either take on more and more elements which are foreign to them, or else they must find an audience with a clear interest in character and individuality. But audiences of this caliber are almost as rare as true artists. Just because modern man is surrounded by a veritable deluge of information on every subject, much more should be required of the genuine artist today in the way of concentration on the portrayal of character and individuality. But the description of character demands extraordinary talent. The modern author who takes literature seriously must steer clear of thousands of events and sentiments which perhaps were justified once, but are a burden today. He finds his road more and more blocked with clichés or used material. He must even avoid portraying sincere emotions if they add nothing to the description of character. He cannot afford to get involved in psychological commentaries or sociological guesswork. Instead of being able to draw on a wide choice of nuances of speech, the true artist must confine himself to those word pictures and images which, in his opinion, are unique and which help reveal personality. Strange though this may sound, a genuine writer of fiction today must pay more attention to what he must not say than to what he may express in his work. He constantly must set himself limits. Outsiders may think that such an author is retreating or regressing. But like the chess game of today, the game of literature consists more in avoiding pitfalls than in creating literary spectaculars. The task of avoiding clichés, factual as well as verbal, is well nigh impossible. For however much one human being may be different from another, people have a great deal in common, and given certain situations, will react in the same manner. What a writer must be careful about is not to create the kind of situation that would call for clichés and generalizations. He must remember that his object is not humanity, but a single person or a few people, a single situation, events and conditions which will never occur again. A story is not an example, but a unique item in the history of mankind. It is not an easy thing to preach limits in an epoch of so-called literary expansion or explosion. In addition, these limits must be worked out by the author himself. In all the profusion of literary criticism today, storytelling is becoming a forgotten art. I don't know of a critic who has tried to call back literature to its natural frontiers. Modern literary criticism has become so involved in psychology and sociology that it has forgotten that literature has laws of its own. The sphere of the literary artist is individuality, the uniqueness and distinction inherent in human nature, in man's destiny, and in the circumstances in which he lives. No one will deny that there is more to link men together than there is to set them apart. But only that which sets them apart is the final concern of the literary artist. Science, including history, psychology, and psychiatry, is engaged in a never-ending request for generalizations, for a formula, a law. The artist, on the other hand, deliberately sets out to search for that which occurs only once. Art's aim is to provide the insight that just as no two fingerprints are identical, so no characters and destinies are alike. Pornography is not art because it deals with sex in general, not with unique events. Neither are many of the tales about war and its cruelties, starvation, revolution, mass rebellion, terror. These tales touch our hearts, but they don't give us the sublime gift that art can offer. If art has anything at all to teach us, it is the fact that in the beginning there was the exception. This is the road of the literary artist and of every other form of art. However, the artist cannot achieve this end by direct means. The media at his disposal are not personal in character. The word, which is the writer's medium, is anything but specific. The term table can refer to all kinds of tables all over the world. And love can be used to describe a great many types of affection. With words which have no individuality and which are subjected to constant wear and tear, the writer must create something unique. He does this through constant observation of human behavior and finding new combinations in which to employ the word. The words may be art-worn, but the possibilities for combinations are inexhaustible. Seen from a purely mathematical angle, the number of such possible combinations is infinite. Some symbolists actually try to make use of this mathematical infinity. But symbols without observation are not sufficient to bring art character. The literary artist must adhere to nature. He cannot paint his picture by heart. The symbol is no more than the culmination of a work of art. Actually, the very character of the symbol is scientific rather than individualistic. The artistic symbol must serve as a bridge between the individual and the general, but not as a method of creativity. This is a truth which many adherents of symbolism have overlooked. The task of the prose writer, briefly stated, is to avoid the art-worn phrase and at the same time not to overlook the living human being. To skim over as swiftly as possible that which is common to all, stressing the unique element instead. To make use of knowledge without becoming a pseudoscientist, a sociologizer, a psychologizer, or even a moralist. To strive for symbolic effect without getting involved in symbolic lingo. And to be original, all the while using a language that is clear and intelligible. The worst mistake a writer can make is to assume that the days of aesthetic enjoyment are past and that the artist can permit himself to bore his audience in the name of some higher purpose. This is a fatal error. There is no paradise to compensate bored readers. In art, as in sex, the act and the enjoyment go together. If there is redemption in literature, it must be imminent. In contrast to politics, art does not thrive on promises. It may pay little, but it is all in cash. If it does not impress you now, it never will. The great number of guides to works of literature which are being published show the pernicious effect which erroneous and pretentious criticism has had on the reader. It is very bad indeed if a reader must have a guide in order to understand Maupassant or Chekhov. Those authors whose works cannot be enjoyed without commentaries and explanations are not worth the efforts of the commentator. Our era has seen the rise of a type of writer who hides his boring personality behind riddles. The deciphering of such riddles may be pleasurable to some pedantic mind, but it does not afford artistic enjoyment. Human individuality is not discovered by tricks of speech. The real writer restricts the volume of the words used, while broadening their meaning. He starts out with general statements and proceeds from there to a description of the hero and his specific case. As he proceeds, the writer must remember that his work has to evoke a sense of enjoyment in the reader, to lift his spirit, and to give him pleasure and the means of escape which every form of true art affords, be it comedy or tragedy. The literary artist cannot probe into the human individuality without limits. He cannot solve social problems, try to reform society. He's not a teacher, but basically a storyteller. Even some of the great works of poetry were narrative until not long ago. The writer has power, but it is a force without a vector. He can stir the mind, but not direct it. He cannot push the wheels of history forward or detain them. Whenever he tries consciously to lead humanity, to change society, he fails miserably. Terrible as these words may sound to many of you, he was and must remain an entertainer in the highest sense of the word. He can only touch those truths which evoke interest, create curiosity, and tension. The true artist must have a sense of proportion. He cannot, like the scientist, proceed directly and with a single purpose. In art, a truth which is boring is not true. The mistaken notion that the artist does not and need not consider the audience and its patience is closely bound up with the false conceptions of art now in vogue among many literary critics and among readers whose tastes have already been ruined. The idea that a writer can write just for himself is nothing more than an excuse for those who have nothing to write about. The sole standard by which any literary work can be gauged is the reader's reaction, the pleasure he derives or the pain which he enjoys. True, there are readers of inferior caliber, vulgar readers, or perverted readers who derive pleasure from bad writing. True, there have always been writers who were not appreciated by their contemporaries and in their environment, but then who eventually discovered them. The esoteric writer may decide to aim his writing at a minority, but he cannot talk to himself forever or search for truth like a scientist without regard to anything else. It is no mere accident that many of the great masters of literature address themselves directly to their readers. They saw their audience before their very eyes. Sometimes they would even apologize to their readers because it seemed to them that they were exceeding their limits, and that the readers might lose patience. At times they attempted to buy the reader's favor by compliments or even rebuffs. Solipsism is not art. The artist must assume that other people do exist. The fiction writer is not a creator of ideas or ideals or an explainer of facts. What he discovers must not only be true, it has to possess beauty. There is no such thing as ugly art. If it is ugly, it is not art. If it only disturbs, it is nothing more than a disturbance. If it tries to teach, to guide, to analyze the psyche or social events without regard to proportion and beauty, construction and rhythm, it is lost from the very beginning. One of the false doctrines proclaimed by some literary criticism is that form is all important and that the plot just of secondary concern. Actually, form and plot cannot be considered apart from one another. The essayism that has invaded modern literature, the forced sophistry, and the self-analysis are often attempts to concede the lack of a plot, of a story. The same applies to those stilted productions of the stage that have no true drama. The fact that pulp writers fabricate cheap suspense is not an argument against genuine suspense. Without suspense, there can be no literature. If the reader isn't eager to find out what will happen next, or if he knows the outcome in advance, he doesn't have a story at all. Patched up plots, tedious flashbacks, pseudo-Freudian explanations are destroying the fiction of our time. The writer's ambition always to be on the right side, on the side of progress and justice, is turning the novel of today into a routine, a habit, and a mannerism. Some modern fiction is constantly complaining instead of letting the facts speak for themselves. The social preacher has become the curse of literature all over the world, terrible as these words may sound to you. It certainly is not my intention here to preach realism, mysticism, or any other literary ism. I do believe in literary experimentation and that there is room for a great many schools of literature. I am sure that there are new media and new methods still to be developed in writing. Every creative writer brings to his work his own variation on style and topic. But I do not believe that the maximum can be attained by discarding the minimum, namely by broadening the definition of literature to such an extent that it becomes blurred, or by constricting it to such a degree that it becomes a puzzle. True progress in any field is achieved not by expanding its definition, but by enlarging its content. In medicine, for instance, there are more specialists today than ever before, and the specialties in turn are divided into subcategories. Similar specialization has occurred in every field of science, as well as in technology. In an era when men are preparing to fly to Mars, there's little time for dilettantism and eclecticism. There is yet another point which I would like to discuss. Within the past few years, the view has been spread that talent is a term without meaning, that it represents an art form concept, a metaphysical concept. moderns don't like to deal with things that can't be measured, weighed, photographed, or analyzed in a laboratory. Many feel that the concept of talent belongs in the realm of parapsychology. According to the classic definition, talent is a quality with which a person is born. Those who believe that character and personality are molded entirely by environment have no patience with the old-fashioned concept of talent. But neither Lysenko nor others of his kind will ever be able to cancel the role of heredity in art as well as in other fields. The most important manifestation of talent are an innate and never relenting urge to brood about the so-called eternal questions, a refusal to accept human and animal suffering. Individualism is the very air the talented person breathes. He is never a collectivist. He may be loved by many, but he is not a leader of the masses. No matter how deeply he is rooted in his environment, he will never be truly a part of it. He will always be the exception. He belongs and does not belong to the society in which he lives. True talent wrangles not so much with social orders as with God. The talented person is often a pessimist or even a fatalist, but he cannot be an atheist for the simple reason that by his very nature he must wrestle with the higher powers. He may revile God, but he cannot ignore him. This is the reason why no dictator or social revolutionary has ever succeeded in harnessing talent for his purposes. I do not envy the true artist of the future. He may even face more difficulties than did Dostoevsky, Edgar Allan Poe, and Van Gogh. He may be forced to fight against triteness, which will appear in the trappings of originality. He may have to do battle with cruelty that will preach humanity. In a planned economy, he may even be altogether restrained from self-expression. Nevertheless, I believe that true art cannot vanish. The talent that is genuine is endowed with a force that no one can destroy. Within the past century, philosophy has become so analytical, so self-critical, and so overly self-conscious that it almost has committed suicide. I do not think that art will meet with the same fate. I believe that art, expressed in the written word, will yet rear edifices of astounding beauty and harmony. Upon the ruins of banal trash, shallow psychology, false sociology, and empty formalism, there will rise an art pure in character. It will reveal those whims and surprises that are found nowhere else except in the human personality, its struggle and growth. As it entertains, art keeps on searching for the eternal truths in its own fashion. It still tries to penetrate the essence of being, to solve the riddle of time and change, to find an answer to suffering, to reveal love in the very abyss of cruelty and injustice. The true artist has never made peace with death and oblivion. He knows that we are a fragment of God's unending book, a moment in eternity. Our hopes are closely connected with all the stars, all the galaxies of the cosmos. If the universe is an accident, so are we. If the universe makes sense, so do we. This is the message both of religion and of art. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to this personal point of view. If it does not serve any other purpose, it will help, I hope, to clarify the way of thinking of a single writer. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. The lady says that if you want to ask questions, we will be very happy to answer them if we know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I once told you that I have a trick. I answer another question. So there will be no trouble. The only trouble is I cannot read, so you have to help me read these cards. Maybe someone may ask me a question just by lifting up an arm. I can see. Would you like to ask me a question? Yes. My next book. My next book is going to be a collection of short stories, and I think it will come out in November. There will be some new stories too. They are not only old ones.
Mr. Singer.
Yes, please.
Mr. Singer.
Yes.
Do you believe in time travel? Do you practice time travel? I met one of your characters from 1905.
The gentleman wants to know if I practice time travel. I'm sorry to say that I have never succeeded in any of these things. Although I believe in them, when I read that people do it, I not only do I believe in them, but I envy them. But when I lie down and try to travel in time, I just fall asleep.
What advice would you give to an artist today?
Could you repeat the question?
What advice would you give to an artist today? Either, someone striving to paint a canvas or write a book, to avoid the blocks that you think might exist.
I wish somebody would explain me this question. Either I didn't hear it or I didn't understand
What
it.
advice would you give to an artist today to avoid the blocks that might exist in the future?
What advice I would give to an audience about what?
An artist. To an artist
To
today.
an audit, yes. To an author.
Author or painter.
I would tell to any human being who tries to write, I would tell them two things. First thing is, never deny your roots. If you are a Jew, don't try to write about Gentiles. You can write about Gentiles too, but write mostly about the things and the people you know best. Every person who denies his roots, if he was born somewhere in a little town in Iowa and he says, this little town has nothing for me, it has no meaning, and I rather write about New York or Paris, this writer is already making the mistake of his life. I know that all the great masters of the world always stuck to their little corner, to the little place where they were born. So did let's say the one who wrote Gogol, and so did Flaubert, and so did in this country Faulkner. I don't believe in a writer who goes for 4 weeks to Spain and comes back with a book about Spain. I don't even believe that if he can go for 4 years to Spain and come back to a book about Spain. In my own case, I was 30 years here in this country, and I never dared to write a word about America, feeling that I don't know the country enough. And even now that I have been here longer than I have lived in Poland, I never dare to write about other people than about immigrants from Poland in New York, because I feel that I know them already. This trying, I always say that a writer is not a magician. If he tries to show that he can do things which cannot be done, he is on the way of losing himself. The trouble is that we have many writers today who are deeply ashamed of their roots, and they always try to write about things which they know little or they don't know best. This is one of the pieces of advice I could give. I am not sure that I answered the question the lady asked, but as I told you, if I don't know the answer to one question, I answer another question.
Mr. Singer, a
Yes,
woman
please.
in the audience wants to know what your definition of a story is.
Again, I must have here a translator. I always have to do with translators. Let somebody come up and explain me, repeat to me, what did the lady say?
What is your definition of a story? A story.
Yeah, what is? The definition of a story. Very good. The definition of a story, as far as I am concerned, is there must be a plot, and the writer must feel that it is unique. But let me tell you, in my case, before I sit down to write a story, I need 3 conditions to write it. The first condition is I must have a plot. In other words, a real plot, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I never sit down to write a slice of life because I know that these slices of life seldom succeed. They are mostly boring. I must have a story. But this is not all. This is only the first condition. The second condition is that I must have a passion to write the story. Sometimes I have a plot which pleases me, but somehow the passion to write this plot to develop it is not in me. If I don't have this passion, I will not write the story. But then comes the third condition, which is the most important and the most difficult. This condition is I must feel that I am the only man in the whole world who is able to write this particular story. This does not mean that I'm a great writer. It only means that this particular story couldn't have been written by any other writer, only by myself. Only if I have these 3 conditions, then I sit down to write a story. And I would say that these 3 conditions are necessary not only for me, but for everybody. Unless you have a real plot and a real passion and the conviction, or at least the illusion, that you are the only one who can do it, don't write the story.
What modern writers do you like?
The gentleman wants to know what modern writers do I like. I can tell you what writers I like who are not modern. I was always been in love with Gogol, to such a degree that a few years ago somebody gave me a collection of Gogol stories, a new collection, but publishers keep on publishing new collections, which are the old stories of Gogol, to review them. And when I read them, I said to myself, how is it possible that this man who lived 100 years before me stole so many of my stories? You just asked me if I can travel in time. Here is a trip in time. This man did it. I'm not going to be highly original if I tell you that I like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and such writers like Balzac and Dickens and so on and so on. And Edgar Allan Poe I love dearly for more or less personal reasons. I wouldn't tell people to imitate him as I don't tell people to imitate Kafka. I think there is enough of one Kafka in literature, and there is enough of one Edgar Allan Poe. But I feel that this man, in his stories, which seem to be kind of mystery stories or whatever you define them, has touched the very thing in itself. He has touched the very depths of life and so on. About modern writers, I'm not too hot at all. I think that the 19th century has really given us great writers as it has given us great scientists. Something has happened in our time The writer who sits down in our time to write a story is not satisfied with telling a story. He wants to improve on life. He wants to lead society. He wants, especially in their second novel, many writers feel that this is the time to bring out a novel which will make an end to war and to human misery and to disappointment in marriage and so on and so on and so on. And they all fail miserably because they just cannot do what they undertake. In my case, I never sit down to write with a message. I said once that if all the messages would disappear and only the 10 Commandments would remain, we would still have enough message for the next 1,000 years. Thank you, Kai. What is happening? Does one man ask all the questions and the others just write letters?
Sir?
Yes, my friend.
Experience the subject on which he is writing.
The gentleman asked me to what extent the writer must experience what he is writing. I would say it doesn't have to happen to him. When Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment, there were foolish critics who said that he must have murdered an old woman and her niece because he tells such a story. This is not true. You can write about murder and be a most decent man, and you can write about group sex and be a very faithful husband. However, the writer must be able to see himself in the situation which he writes. Because when Dostoevsky wrote, he told the story about Raskolnikov, he actually told what would happen if Dostoevsky would have done this, how he would react. Because we know ourselves best. And the same thing is true about anything we write about. In other words, the writer should not write only about things which happened, but he should write about things which might have happened to a man whom he knows best. If he tries to write things about a man whom he doesn't know, he will never succeed. And since we know ourselves best, the writer is in every story one way or another.
We'll have 2 more questions.
Yes, please.
I'd like to know if you conceived of the estate and the manor at the same time, or were they, was one an afterthought of the other?
Do me a favor and make your question clear, because I have been brought up in such a way that one has to say to me very clear words. If you are obscure, I don't understand a single word. Tell me what you are asking, or let someone else tell me what your question is.
Did you write the estate after you finished the manor?
Oh, how clear this is now. Yes, my novel, The Man on the Estate, is actually one novel. The only thing is, when it came to publishing and to rewriting and working, I became very tired, and I decided that if I will wait until the whole novel will be rewritten, I will just lose my patience. So because of this, I asked my publisher to publish The Manor first and The Estate later. But actually, it is one book. I wouldn't even call it, there is a word trilogy, but this is not even a duology. It is one book which has been cut into 2 pieces. And I hope one day my publisher will publish it as one book, which it really is.
Yes, the audience wants to ask a question. What do you feel has given your life the most meaning?
The lady wants to know what gives to life the most meaning. Well, I would say that if I would really know the answer, I would have a topic for lecturing all over the world for the next 500 years. However, I will tell you what gives to me the greatest meaning. I think that the greatest gift which God has bestowed on humanity is free will, or at least the illusion of free will. I always get up in the morning with the idea I'm a free man and I can do as I choose. This does not mean that I can travel in time and so on. I mean between two things which I'm able to do, I can choose one of them and organize a certain kind of priority. It is true that I don't practice much what I promise myself. I don't use free will. I think that this gift is the least used of all gifts which humanity has had. When I hear that doctors heal people with psychoanalysis and all kinds of ways, I said, where is the doctor who should try to treat people and cure people by making them act from free will? Because most of us never really use this great gift. This gift is so great that even if we use a part of it, we reach a lot. If we would really be able to use it all the time, I think we would all become supermen or superwomen. So this is, I think, this gives to me the greatest meaning, because in every other respect we are slaves. If you are in love with somebody, you need that the other one should love you too. You cannot then... If you want to be considered a genius, you need somebody to consider you a genius. If you need money, you have to make the money or steal the money. But free will, to choose between two things, in this case, we really don't need the help of anybody else. There's always, I think that Carlyle said it, that there is always, no matter in what situation a human being should not find himself, he can always choose things from his free will. In other words, if you are a prisoner, God forbid, you can still be a decent prisoner or a bad prisoner. Some prisoners get out sooner because of good conduct, others stay because they have behaved badly. There's always a way of doing the best, the way you understand it, and this gives meaning to human life. Is this the end? Ladies and gentlemen, it was a great pleasure, and I hope to see some of you back here the 27th, where I'm going to lecture on the Kabbalah and modern men. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.